In San Francisco, this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Broadcom is betting big on corporate software, paying nearly $19 billion for CA Technologies. But the deal baffled some investors concerned it moves Broadcom too far from its chip-making focus. Plus, in the rapidly growing fintech market, Venmo is hitching a ride with Uber. Will this lead to more partnerships to fight off rising competition? And sky-high bidding war. Comcast increases its offer for Sky to $34 billion. The next move is on Murdoch as he and other CEOs settle in Sun Valley. But first to our top story. China tones down its trade rhetoric amid hints that China and U.S. trade officials may be trying to figure out a way to start talking again. But additional tariffs could go into effect in just a few weeks, and the tech industry is in the crosshairs. For more, we are joined by Bob O'Donnell, president of Technalysis Research, and Anand Srinivasan, senior analyst of semiconductors and tech hardware for Bloomberg Intelligence. Bob, first of all, what is the biggest tech impact that you see so far here?
Well, it's semiconductors and it's telecom-related equipment. Those are the big issues that have been hit and been talked about the most. And the challenges for a lot of tech companies, of course, is that tech hardware is completely entwined with China. So many of the subcomponents come from there, or the subcomponents, like rare earth metals, for example, things that go into pieces, way down the chain. But it's so hard to extract that for all these companies. So as a result, even though we haven't seen the tariffs on phones and the typical products you'd be concerned with in terms of tech, those components are being purchased by everybody. So ultimately, all of these tech companies, hardware companies that is in particular, are taking a bit of a hit if these things start to, kick in.
Anand, how rattled is the chip industry by this?
Look, I think we haven't fully figured out the impact of the trade tariff drama, because we've been operating from an assembly standpoint in China for so long. It's been such an efficient place to make technology gizmos, if you may. The chip making industry has also expanded substantially there. All the components are there. The logistics is easy. Nothing is made in the United States anymore, for that matter, most of the other places either. So to completely extricate yourself or penalize a company for operating in China or importing or exporting from China, it's a very dangerous path to go on, because the reverberations of it is not completely known, not even by companies that are fully operating in the space, I would argue.
Bob, what about startups? We've been talking a lot about big tech companies. Where do startups fall into this?
Well, software startups are fine. Generally speaking, there's not going to be an issue there. But it's the hardware companies who are trying to figure out interesting new gadgets or maybe have some tie to it. There has been some discussion to say that cloud-based services could become more expensive because telecom equipment becomes more expensive. That theoretically affects startups, but that's certainly a much lower order kind of an impact.
Then and on, there are companies like NVIDIA, like Broadcom, that get 20% of their sales from China. How does this impact them?
Yeah, so that's a direct demand component, and that effect will be easy to measure, because you will start to see sort of any reciprocal measures by China start to have a direct impact. But again, these are also part and parcel of critical components that go into food chains that China needs and wants, right? These are gaming PCs, for which this is a key supplier. There are not that many suppliers in the world. There's three vendors for GPUs, I would argue. So in a lot of ways, we're joined at the hip on this one, and I'm baffled by the fact that you would try to do as painful an exercise as this one.
Bob, there seems to be a glimmer of hope right now that the sides will start talking again, but could this snowball and get really bad?
Well, it could. In particular, I think what we have to be careful about is China's efforts, and they've made them in the past, to be honest, and they haven't really worked, but to drive their entire own ecosystem, right? This Made in 2025 program that they've been talking about is all about being able to say, look, we're going to develop all the intellectual property we need, the chips we need, and create this entire ecosystem. And it's interesting, I was just in Beijing last week, actually, for a Baidu conference, and talking to some of the people there, and there are a lot of questions there, because you get the sense that there's a lot of people who are saying, you know what, China could follow its own tech path and then the rest of the world follows another. I think up till now we've been assuming, of course, it's a single global tech evolution. If things really get bad, admittedly that's a long way out, we could see these dual paths where technology standards and other things become different. That would be very bad.
Interesting.
And we've seen this with Japan in cases, particularly in the telecom standards, where we've had these diverging paths, and then we've had to coalesce back together. We've had to come back together for 4G, for example. In 2G, we were very different. And these paths, the market has a way of making sense of all of this and putting stuff back together. I agree with Bob in that this would be the divergence in paths for technology evolution is not a good one to go down on.
What's your take on this Broadcom CA Technologies deal? I mean, Hock Tan, the CEO of Broadcom, Qualcomm didn't happen. You know, the administration got involved in that, but certainly still as ambitious as always.
Number one, makes zero strategic sense. Zero strategic sense.
Why?
Number two is that why? Because you're going so far out of your core competence that the only thing that you can do this is a financial engineering play. And Hock Tan can execute a financial engineering play better than most semiconductor makers, better than most technology companies, I would argue. But is this all we got?
Financial engineering to what end?
To expand EPS, expand margins, have cash flows be accretive, etc. But is this all we got? We can do better than this. We can accumulate multiple smaller semiconductor makers and have it be accretive to Broadcom. Agreed that Qualcomm slipped away. Agreed that there's not that many left. But you have plenty of chip makers in the space that have enough size, or put together a few of them, have an impact. Number two, right? Qualcomm NXP is undergoing a substantial amount of drama right now.
Also,
right, so that could
to
fall
China.
through.
It's
Also
in their
relevant,
hands.
right? So that could fall through. Then NXP gets back in play. Would that not be an interesting acquisition candidate? Now, Hock Tan's not historically been interested in auto, so that's a little bit of a drama there. But I'm a little puzzled, as is most of the market. The stock's off 15% right now, give or take. So I think Broadcom could have done better.
Bob,
yeah, I mean,
you agree?
I completely agree. Anand and I were talking about this before we went on the air here, and it's just one of those head-scratching things. Like, where did this come from? It's clearly just sort of this amorphous conglomerate of something related to tech being put together. There's no integration with customers, with supply chain, with anything. So it just makes you kind of scratch your head as to what are they possibly thinking. If you look at it, the barely surface level, oh, well, they're adding software to chips. You could maybe make that argument. But we were talking about Intel trying to buy McAfee years ago. That was an effort. That one actually made some degree of sense because you want security in chips. But in the end, of course, it didn't work out. And this one, I think, is much more challenging.
Okay.
And even with Intel buying Wind River, which was a much smaller acquisition, which is in the business of designing systems using potentially Intel chips, even that didn't work out. Both those acquisitions got sold for pennies on the dollar several years later. So these transactions, chips buying software companies, historically, the data suggests haven't worked out.
All right. We'll keep monitoring it. Anand Srinivasan, Bloomberg Intelligence, Bob O'Donnell of Technalysis. As always, great to have you both here.
Thank you.
Coming up, Apple's new powerhouses. The iPhone giant unveiled its new line of MacBook Pros. We will take a look at the souped-up lineup next. This is Bloomberg. Apple is releasing new versions of its professional-oriented laptops. The iPhone maker just unveiled a new line of MacBook Pros that have developed a fervent fan base among developers and movie editors. This coming as Apple remains in fourth place, market share-wise, for global PC shipments. It currently trails HP, Lenovo, and Dell. Here to tell us more, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers Apple for us. So what's so special about these new MacBook Pros?
These are what the Pro users have been asking for and waiting for. When Apple released the current Mac Pro design at the end of 2016, it had some cool features like the touch bar and a new design. But people are asking, is this really what we want? Is this really what high-end developers and movie editors and photographers want? And the answer was really no for a lot of those people. It was more of a consumer laptop at a Pro price and a Pro name. This seeks to address that. It has a more powerful processor, 70% faster on the 15-inch model, twice as fast on the smaller one. And it has more RAM. RAM is the component that lets you do more things at once. For the first time now, it has desktop quality RAM. So now the higher prices are matching the capabilities.
So what do these movie editors and developers want?
They want to be able to do a lot of stuff at the same time. They want to be able to run lots of programs in the background. They want to use these things. They want to pay $2,000 to $3,000 for a computer because they want it to actually get stuff done for them. They don't want to have to wait. They want their processes to be smooth. They want movies to take shorter times to make. They want apps to be quicker to make, and that's why they're paying so much money for these tools, and that's what Apple's answering today with the MacBook Pro update.
Talk to us about market share. I mean, Macs have always had a smaller market share than other PC makers. Is that changing, and could, like the iPhone, which, you know, has a more dominant market share in smartphones, could that happen for Macs?
Right, and there's really two ways to look at it, and you're completely right. The Mac, in terms of growth, has been stagnant. In terms of unit sales, it's been around 4 to 5 million units a quarter for as long as I can remember, so for at least the last 5 or 6 years, and it's been that way. 20 million units last year, that's about a 4 million, 5 million a quarter average, and so it's stayed the same. But then you look at the iPad, and growth has sort of slowed over the past several quarters. So I actually think it's a good thing that growth has been very steady in a marketplace where other devices have actually seen slower growth.
Do you think that Apple could take a larger share of the pie, even if the absolute numbers don't necessarily accelerate in a plateauing market, if you will? Could Apple own more of it?
Well, I think Apple has a little, secret up its sleeves. They didn't talk about it today, but they're working on a revamped new generation of the Mac, a cheaper model that we wrote a little bit about earlier this year. And I think that is going to give them an opportunity to sort of hike up their growth and their market share on the Mac line. So that's something to look forward to over the next year.
Well, we've talked about with Xiaomi going public that, no one's really succeeded at a cheaper high-end smartphone, which Apple has tried,
right.
didn't quite work out. Can they get a decent amount of market share with a cheaper Mac?
I think so. The problem is that the MacBook Air, and I think you had one back in the day, but I know I had one, super successful, super flashy computer, under $1,000. People love the price point. The problem is that it hasn't been revamped in 7, 8 years. So if they come in at that price point with a new MacBook Air replacement, I think that's going to be really hot for a lot of people.
All right, Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman. We shall see. All right, Slack has been the go-to company chat app. Now, Microsoft is aiming to give Slack a run for its money. The company just announced it is releasing a free version of its corporate chat application called Teams. It's available for groups up to 300 people and gives users unlimited messages and search, as well as 10 gigabytes of data storage. Joining us from Microsoft headquarters in Redmond, Washington is Lori Wright, General Manager of Microsoft 365. Lori, thank you so much for joining us. So what does Microsoft Teams have that Slack does not?
Thanks for having me first, Emily. One of the things we're really excited about this today is being able to take what Teams was built for, and that is a digital workspace, and have it where you can do everything from chat to collaborate on files to make a video call or even a phone call, all of that right together. And so when we think about our competitive opportunity here, it's that we can bring the power of the Office suite in, integrate that right in, be able to bring in unlimited number of applications, and really be able to offer this out to everyone.
So, Slack says it has 500,000 organizations, 8 million daily active users. Microsoft has 200 organizations since Teams launched 16 months ago. What's the plan to win market share?
Yeah, just to make sure we have the right statistic, it's actually 200,000 organizations that we have brought into Teams in the last year. So incredible market coverage. Over 60% of those users are outside of the United States. We're looking at 181 markets around the world, and we're thrilled with that progress. We have 135 million monthly active users of Office 365. All of those users have access to Teams. And for us, this announcement today is really about focusing on small businesses and helping these small businesses who are sometimes strapped for resources. You think about a startup, a nonprofit, all of these organizations, that they can come in and start getting the power of Microsoft Teams.
How does this fit into the broader vision, Microsoft's future, the path that Satya Nadella, the CEO, has laid out to increase productivity in the workplace?
Right. if you think about productivity, long email has been about individual productivity. And this now is the expansion, from a productivity perspective. We've seen such a shift in the workforce where organizations are much more thinking about, move from how an individual gets work done to how groups get work done. And that's what Teams really is. It leverages all the power of Office 365 and Microsoft 365, but brings it together through the lens of teamwork. And when you look at the numbers, you think about that, over, a third of the planet has an email address. And so now how do we take any of those individuals who are working together in a group and give them access to the, this hub for teamwork?
How do you see the future of work and the future of collaboration at work changing? I mean, in a way, the advent of Slack, it was almost shocking that nothing that simple existed in workplaces before, or that workplaces remain tethered to their sort of own internal systems. How does that change in the future?
What we have personally seen is the shift from in the workforce. You have gone from long form communication to now very short form communication. People like simple chat. They like to get messages out there. But increasingly so, there's also just the distribution of the workforce. People are working remotely. More than half of people in the workforce today work remotely at least some part of the time. There's also more than 5 generations for the first time in history together in the workforce. And with all of these different trends, what we're finding is we need new ways to bring people together and help them move from that individual productivity to how they can achieve more together.
Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet are all sort of driving toward this potential $1 trillion market cap. How does a development like this actually add to Microsoft's bottom line?
For us, it's about giving people the tools that they need to enhance how they do work. And so, we're looking at this as an opportunity to say, as I mentioned earlier, we have great success in our Office 365 suite. We have 135 million monthly active users on that. There's 200 million Windows 10 devices in market. All these sorts of things are happening and they're growing. But for us with Teams, it truly is about just making sure that each of those individuals who are working in a collaborative setting can come and experience it and then upgrade to the full power of the Office 365 suite when the time is right for them.
All right, Lori Wright, Microsoft 365 General Manager on the launch of Teams. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Emily. Great to be here.
Coming up, Uber offers a new way to pay for your ride. What does this mean for Apple Pay? This is Bloomberg. Elon Musk may have missed out on his chance to save the children trapped in a cave in Thailand, but he's now pledging to help the people of Flint, Michigan. Responding to a Flint resident, Musk tweeted on Wednesday, quote, "Please consider this a commitment that I will fund fixing the water in any house in Flint that has water contamination above FDA levels." No kidding. While Musk has yet to contact the city, Flint's public information officer says the mayor would be open to speaking with him. Well, splitting an Uber with friends is about to get a lot easier. Starting Thursday, Uber riders in the United States will begin to see a Pay with Venmo option right next to the already existing Apple Pay button when selecting a payment method. Uber joins over 2 million merchants offering Pay with Venmo and becomes the largest app to do so since the feature's debut last year. Joining us now to discuss the partnership, Bloomberg's Julie Verhage, who broke this story. And Julie, it's almost surprising that this doesn't exist yet. How transformative could this be?
Right, you've seen Apple Pay inside Uber for a while now. So one of my questions was, why didn't you guys do this right away? And I guess they just thought that now was the right time. When they looked back, PayPal can obviously see a lot of information on what people are using the app for. And over the past year alone, there had been 6 million transactions that had mentioned Uber in them. So there was obviously a way like, hey, people are, Uber are asking people to pay them back on Venmo after using the Uber with each other. So why not just make it seamless? Right inside the app, you can use it and then say, hey, my friend Stephanie is riding with me, let's split this bill, and not have to go and make that request later on. Maybe you would forget to do it later in something as well. So it's something they thought would be very profitable for both sides of the equation.
The transactions will be complete with custom emojis as well. How significant is this for PayPal and Venmo?
I think it's a big push. You know, PayPal stock has been doing very well. The past year alone, it's up roughly 50%. And, you know, there's been a big push by Dan Schulman, the CEO, and other executives there to monetize Venmo. Because right now, when it was just the peer-to-peer offering where I would, you know, request money from my roommate to pay me back for rent, they're not making any money off of that. So recently, late last year, they started this pay with Venmo option at merchants, which they now have more than 2 million signed on to, Uber being the latest one. And then they make a portion of the fee. So this is definitely part of that monetization strategy. I don't know that Uber itself signing on will make a huge impact on the financials because Braintree, another startup that is owned by PayPal, already powers the payments on Uber. But it is something they want to increase that Venmo brand because there's so many things. Almost like Facebook and Instagram, right? Like Instagram is seen as this great thing that sort of escaped a lot of the scathing things that Facebook's dealt with lately, and it's the bigger, better brand right now. Venmo's something that not a lot of people know that PayPal owns, and it's this very valuable customer set that they have. A lot of millennials using this many times a day, if not, you know, several times a week too.
And what about the possibility of Venmo cannibalizing PayPal's business, given its popularity?
I mean, I don't know that it would totally cannibalize it. It's definitely something that I guess PayPal wouldn't necessarily care too much which one was there, but I do think that Venmo has the stronger brand right now. And if you keep seeing more pay with Venmo options versus pay with PayPal options when you go on, you know, an internet site to, you know, make a purchase, it definitely, you could see Venmo gaining traction. And they want it to gain traction in that, you know, Square Cash has also been gaining a lot of traction lately, and the last thing they want to see is something like that coming up and, you know, taking the wind out of their sails on this momentum that they have right now.
So Lyft doesn't have this option yet. Do we expect Lyft to answer here, and who else is next to join Venmo? I think
there's definitely a big push to continue to ramp up the number of retailers, merchants, apps that are offering the pay with Venmo option. So I wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Lyft or, you know, another app that I have on my phone start offering this in the future as well.
All right, Bloomberg Tech's Julie Verhage in New York. Thanks as always, Julie. Coming up, China versus Silicon Valley. The Asian nation already produces most of the world's technology and now it wants to lead in developing it as well. That's next. And later, crypto thefts are on track to top more than $1 billion this year. How are thieves able to hack into exchanges and what's being done to prevent it? This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. It is no secret that China's goal is to be the preeminent tech power in the world. From its Made in China 2025 initiative to its burgeoning startup seeing the country plans to dislodge America from atop that perch. And one of the keys to doing so, having its own version of Silicon Valley, dozens of them. You see, China currently has a population of $2.1 billion, tech center in Beijing, and 156 state-level tech zones scattered across the country. But at the heart of its desires to supplant Silicon Valley is the largest city in eastern China, Nanjing. The city is building a tech center and offering plenty of incentives for tech companies and startups to set up shop there. So, can China do it? Can it surpass Silicon Valley? To answer that, I want to bring in Bloomberg Tech's Asia managing editor, Peter Elstrom, who wrote about this in this week's edition of Bloomberg Business Week. He joins us from New York. So, Peter, obviously some of the biggest China tech companies like Tencent and Baidu are based in the biggest cities in China. Why focus on Nanjing? What's happening there?
Well, China has been aspiring for a long time to try to reach the U.S. in different technology fields and surpass, as you mentioned, in some of the key fields like artificial intelligence and electric vehicles. Nanjing gives you a close-up look at the incentives that they're offering to some of these companies as they try to achieve some key hurdles in terms of the technology that they're pursuing. So we traveled to Nanjing and we were able to see the opening ceremony for a startup that was moving into space there. It's an AI startup called A Innovation. And they talked about moving into the space and what they're able to do with this kind of government support. I mean, in some senses, it's a little bit like the support that American states are trying to give to Amazon to persuade them to bring their second headquarters, but it goes way beyond the traditional incentives we would see here. It's not only no taxes, it's free office space. In some cases, it's free housing for their employees. And also the party chief for Nanjing talked about the kind of financial incentives you could get. If you're a venture capital firm, you can get several million RMB, and if you invest that money in startups in Nanjing, if you lose it, if the startup goes under, they will refund your money at the end of it. So it's a very interesting model. It's one that we really haven't seen in the technology world before, and it's at odds, obviously, with the traditional free market system that has worked so well in Silicon Valley.
Sequoia Capital Chair Mike Moritz has argued that China is already winning the global tech race. This is a venture capital firm with a huge practice in the United States, but also a big practice in China. Would you agree?
That's right. Yeah, I don't think it's already winning at this point. I think what's interesting about it is that they are using this very alternative model to fostering a tech industry that seems to be working pretty well at this point. They are gaining ground in some key areas. There are complaints from the U.S. I mean, part of the reason that we wanted to do this story is this comes at a time of very high trade tensions between the U.S. and China, of course, and the U.S. has made accusations about unfair practices by China and its tech industry. Part of that is protectionism to keep out companies like Facebook and Twitter. Part of that is these allegations of stealing intellectual property for some of the American companies. But there are Chinese tech companies that are gaining ground. Alibaba and Tencent now, of course, rank among the 10 most valuable publicly held companies in the world, alongside Apple and Amazon. And they have a whole bunch of startups that are getting fostered by these cities and are coming on pretty strong in a number of key fields.
Obviously, there's still a lot of uncertainty surrounding how this trade war or trade dispute, if you will play out. But how much do you think what we've seen so far could actually put a dent in China's ambitions to become the leader in AI or the leader in electric cars?
Well, there are two sides, I think, to that answer. One, it does make it more difficult in some respects. The Trump administration has said it's going to give closer scrutiny to Chinese investments in key American technology fields. So companies like Tencent that have been investing very aggressively in the U.S. so far in AI and other key areas may face a tougher road in terms of investing there. But the other side of it is that this is going to make China, the government, and also the Chinese technology companies even more determined to develop their own technology because they will need it more if these trade tensions get even higher. I mean, one of the key issues in the dispute over ZTE was that ZTE essentially had to shut down when the U.S. cut off access to American components. That was because they need chips, they need optical components from American suppliers because there are none available, not just domestically, but from other foreign providers too. So this will become an even more important issue for China to develop its own technology industry as these trade tensions rise.
So the city of Nanjing is one place. What is happening across? I mean, it's such a vast country, so many different cities. You know, what's happening beyond Nanjing and Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong to this end?
As you mentioned at the top of the show, there are more than 100 of these parks. And to be clear, there are some reservations even within China about whether this makes sense, right? When you see this kind of government activism, there are concerns that too much money is going to go into certain fields, money is going to be wasted. China has tried this in solar before, in steel before. They've ended up with overcapacity, and and companies going under in many of those places. So what the cities try to do is specialize in key areas so that they're not all competing in the same space. It is driven by this kind of party activism where you have the mayor and the local party chief who are trying to advocate for their city. Nanjing went through an interesting history where the previous mayor was actually convicted of corruption for doling out contracts to the wrong kind of people. And he went to jail because of that. So their goal is to try to leave that legacy behind, to go beyond the old school manufacturing that they used to do, and really develop new technology industries that can be key, particularly artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and some of these other key areas for Beijing.
All right, Bloomberg Tech's Peter Elstrom, as always.
Thanks
for
Emily.
stopping by. Well, Apple is being sued over its Do Not Disturb feature found on iPhones. California-based SMTM Technology says this feature infringes on its own patent. The iOS mode allows iPhone users to freeze a phone when its owner is driving and send automated responses to incoming texts. The lawsuit could complicate Apple's efforts to update its iPhones and tablets. Apple has yet to respond to requests for comment. Coming up, criminals are using more sophisticated techniques to hack into crypto exchanges and steal funds without a trace. Details on that next. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. Cryptocurrencies are still considered a risky investment for the more traditional investors, to say the least, and only riskier as thefts on crypto exchanges continue to rise. Let's get straight to Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London with more. Caroline?
Yeah, we've got a fascinating guest passing here through London, usually based over with you in San Francisco. It is, of course, none other than CipherTrace. Now, according to the security firm CipherTrace, Emily, more than $760 million in cryptocurrency was stolen from exchanges so far this year, easily outpacing that of 2017. We're therefore joined by CipherTrace CEO Dave Jevons. Wonderful to have you here, David. 760 million already in the first half of the year. How much are we going to see by the whole of 2018?
Well, I think it's not unreasonable to suggest $1.5 billion. If we look at the trends from last year and the year before, we're already double or almost triple what we saw in 2017, and we're only halfway through the year. We're seeing new exchanges set up.
Yeah.
They're not quite ready for prime time oftentimes, and that's where we're seeing the money being stolen from.
And so is it being stolen easily because there's a lack of enforcement on the exchange side, or how sophisticated is actually the criminal being here?
So we're seeing the broad swath. So sometimes they go after customers of exchanges, phishing them. Give me your password. Give me your private keys. Sometimes more sophisticated attacks like, let me go after your IT people at the exchange, phish them, and get access to critical systems. Sometimes highly sophisticated, let me plant malicious code inside of your computers and then copy and steal private keys and take over the entire asset base of an exchange.
Is there a regionalization to this?
It's global. Yeah. I mean, the criminals are global, the exchanges are global. It happens to everyone in every country.
What about the global regulators? Because we have seen being called from the exchanges, particularly the more secure, sophisticated ones. We know Coinbase has been wanting to be regulated.
Yep.
They want the industry to grow up. And we've heard from the regulators saying, hey, know your customer, AML, anti-money laundering. And are we starting to see regulators get it?
Regulators are definitely getting it. Now, it's different from country to country, but we've seen a lot of great work in the U.S. Europe is really being very forward-thinking. It's interesting to look at how people are looking at it. Sometimes it's very defensive. So let's take existing laws, tweak them a tiny bit, or just apply them. And you have other people who are more progressive, like Malta, part of the EU, and they're aggressively trying to be crypto island. Bring exchanges in from all around the world. You know, come to our country. We give you a very clean set of AML, anti-money laundering, and know your customer regs. We'll give you a low tax rate, and we'll have a nice regulatory environment to encourage you to come and invest in our countries and bring crypto here. Same is happening in Bermuda. and we're seeing it in a few other countries, really trying to be forward-thinking.
And will this be enough? Will this end up ensuring that exchanges are strong enough, are sophisticated enough to ensure that then they're not as easily hacked and you start becoming more like the banks have had to grow to be?
Yeah, and if you look at the banking industry, if you remember back, oh, say 10 years ago when phishing was really starting to get going against consumers and businesses that use banks, the regulators had to step in a little bit and put recommendations and say, well, here's the best practices to stop phishing, to detect transactions. You know, if we're in London and then 20 minutes later we're doing transactions from Russia and then from California, our account's been hacked.
Okay.
Same is going to start happening with regulators and best practices in the crypto industry.
Talk to us, give us a flavor of some of the more extraordinary ways you found these new breed of criminals start to identify and target particular exchanges and players.
So the criminals are smart. They're going where the money is, and these are very educated people. So if you thought phishing was bad, I mean, these are people who grew up with knowing cryptology, and cryptocurrency from the beginning. They know malware code. They have access to all the best tools, but they also understand social engineering, and you don't have to be the best coder in the world. You have to be good at tricking people. So they're very, very good about, for example, figuring out who in IT is at a crypto exchange, targeting them with 1 or 2 very targeted, simple emails to get their passwords to critical systems so they can actually move a whole exchange over for maybe an hour or 2, but take over all the traffic.
Yeah.
Or planting a very special piece of code inside of an exchange to get them access to then copy code. Or how about this? We'll hijack the cell phone number of one of the critical employees, maybe even a C-level employee, port their phone number over.
Which they've done to those who actually own crypto.
That's right. Well, they do it to people who work in exchanges. And now when messages come in about security validations, password codes, it's going to the criminal and not the employee.
What are you guys doing? You've just launched a new product. So how much can CipherTrace be offering products to help educate and to help ensure that the exchanges aren't getting targeted in this way?
We're seeing the industry mature, and what we've been doing is creating anti-money laundering capabilities for these crypto exchanges and for hedge funds and other investors who need to verify the source of funds didn't come from stolen sources or maybe from malware. Yeah.
And I think this is what people perhaps misconceive, is that you can trace bad actions within crypto. It's not completely unidentifiable. The fact is, it's in a forever there ledger to a certain extent. It's just, you got to work that much harder.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to figure out who's who, and you can also get a lot of value by figuring out what's a good transaction versus not just finding the bad ones. Because if you risk score a transaction, in the same ways you would with a credit card transaction or even a bank login, if you apply that to crypto, you can start to say, well, these are all looking pretty safe, pretty good. And these ones we don't know anything about, or we see some bad traffic, and you can then score out the customers or the funds that are dangerous and keep them off your system.
It's going to be fascinating to see how this industry continues to grow and as protection continues to grow.
It's going to grow up. Everybody wants it. The institutional investors want it. The consumers want it. The exchanges want it. So I think it's a great maturing phase for the industry.
Dave Jevons, great that you were passing through here in London. Thank you very much indeed. Of course, the CEO of CipherTrace. Emily.
All right, Caroline, I do want to talk to you about another story that's coming out of the UK right now, a new report from the British government highlighting how intent it is to maintain this smooth transfer of personal data between the EU and the UK. Talk to us a little bit about the current data rules and how they could change post-Brexit, given all the drama right now.
Yeah, this is the new white paper coming from the Prime Minister, Theresa May. She's coming out with a softer form of Brexit, but within that is the devil of the detail of how the UK survives after exiting the EU in business and indeed in terms of protection when it comes to data. How will data flows be impacted? And I think this is clear that the UK is going to leave the so-called digital single market. It's no longer going to be under the EU directive as it stands. So therefore, the UK is going to have to prove its adequacy, Emily. Its adequacy when it comes to the fundamental right of privacy, of protecting your data, but also the right to so-called be forgotten by big websites such as Google and indeed wanting your data to be taken down from the internet. So like Argentina at the moment, and indeed countries such as New Zealand, they actually are deemed adequate when it comes to the EU. They're allowed to have free flows of data across the borders. The UK is not going to automatically be assumed to have that when it leaves the EU. There's actually in the past been conflict between the EU and the UK about how perhaps the UK the surveillance systems that they have in place, looking at data, how spies access it, and notably some of the Five Eyes, as it's called, the relationship the UK has with New Zealand, Canada, the US, and those sorts of countries, to be able to share data and within spy rings. So really, this is something that can't be assumed the UK will get so-called adequacy, and it's going to have to prove it to the EU when it leaves the EU in post-Brexit.
Right, not just about privacy, but also about national security. Those are at least the concerns. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde in London. Thanks so much. Coming up, your move, Murdoch. The ball is back in Fox's court as the bidding war for Sky heats up. We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg. The 2018 Emmy nominations are in, and Netflix has achieved a new milestone. The streaming giant scored the most nominations, 112. Netflix overtakes HBO, which has held the top spot for 17 years straight. And the news reflects the rapid rise of Netflix, which started receiving nominations for programming in 2013. Sticking with media, another development in the bidding war for Sky, Britain's top pay TV provider. On Thursday, the UK government approved a bid from Fox for Sky, conditional on Fox selling Sky's 24-hour news channel to Disney on competition grounds. But the standoff is far from over. Fox now has to decide whether to beat Comcast's latest bid of $34 billion, which represents a 5.4% premium over what Fox has on the table. Bloomberg senior deals reporter Ed Hammond joins us now, live from the Sun Valley Conference in Idaho, where the great and good of the media and tech world gather every July. And Ed, so much going on in the background here, not the least of which Comcast and Disney fighting over 21st Century Fox's entertainment assets. You know, walk us through where things stand right now.
You know, Emily, I think often when we're talking about these kind of big saga deals that go on for a long time, we refer to them as wars. And it's usually that's an overstatement. I think in this case, there's probably some accuracy there because there's so many different battles being fought on so many different fronts and so many potential outcomes here. As you say, Sky has a deal with Fox that it's already basically agreed to. The government has said in the UK that that deal is fine. They don't want the Murdochs having too much plurality of ownership in the UK, so they've said you can do it as long as you do the other deal that you've agreed to do with Disney. Now Comcast show up and they say, we want to buy Sky. They've also said they want to buy the Fox assets. So they're in it in two ways. Disney are in it in one way. Sky is there. Fox is there. It's a really complicated picture at the moment. Interestingly, all of the main players in that particular dance are here. Murdoch is here. Bob Iger is here. Brian Roberts is here. Brian Roberts actually stopped briefly to talk to the press this morning. And his message was, you guys need to find something better to write about.
Well, and as you say, this is sort of a battle of media moguls, Brian Roberts, Rupert Murdoch, Bob Iger. What is the end game here for, let's start with Comcast and Brian Roberts.
Well, I think that for them, Sky is a huge prize. They want to expand their international business. Sky would get them into that kind of immediately, and there would be no regulatory issues, so they could foresee closing that deal quite quickly. The issue of them buying the Fox assets is one their shareholders have been fairly discontented about already, and when you saw when they made their last move to go after the Fox assets, their shares traded off quite a lot. It's seen that they're going to have to overpay if they're going to beat Disney. It's also not the deal that the Murdochs have said they want to do. The Murdochs want to do the deal with Disney. Disney have outlined a solution whereby there would be clear legacy roles for people in the Murdoch family at the pro forma company. So I think if Comcast do this Sky deal and then follow up and do the Fox assets deal, it will be interesting to see how their shareholders respond to it. That said, Mr. Roberts obviously has a good track record with his investors, and I'm sure would be given quite a lot of latitude to go out and execute something like this.
All right, so we can imagine many intense conversations happening there. What else is coming up in Sun Valley?
Well, I think the interesting thing is that you have a lot of these deals that we're talking about are going on because we have so much pressure from particularly the tech industry, but also other forces coming into traditional media and really disrupting. This morning, Jeff Bezos addressed the conference. I imagine that was a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure there will be discussions going on between people like Jeff Bezos, like Netflix, and some of these more traditional media players about exactly how the future is going to shake up. Then you have the political backdrop, obviously everything that's going on with Trump and his upcoming summit with Putin. We had Ambassador Bill Burns on earlier this morning. He was talking about the sort of how everything that's going on, this if you like, meringue politics, where there's a lot of apparently good things happening, but very little of substance. And that's a backdrop which is difficult to do deals among. And we've seen even more recently, the trade war with China is putting a real freeze on some of those deals because people just do not know the environment in which they're going to be executing transactions.
And where do we expect U.S. regulators to fit in on these deals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we went sort of full 180 on this because the original expectation was that the Trump administration would be very light touch regulation, business friendly. Then obviously they came out very strongly to block AT&T Time Warner. That created this fear that there would be a more muscular approach among the various regulatory bodies under the Trump administration. But then they've done other things that would appear to go completely the opposite direction, where they've already come out and they've said Disney Fox would be fine by us, which if you consider like what that is putting together in terms of media power, that you would think under a traditional antitrust environment would be something that would be looked at closely. And then I think the last point on that is you look at CFIUS under Trump has obviously been a real outlier in terms of its behavior, going after Broadcom on the Qualcomm deal. That was completely unprecedented, never seen before. So I think uncertainty is probably the word I would use to describe it all.
Uncertainty it is, certainly. All right, Bloomberg's Ed Hammond in Sun Valley, Idaho. Thanks so much for joining us. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. On tomorrow's show, we will be discussing the great Twitter purge with Krishna Subramanian, co-founder of Captive 8. What will be the fallout when the platform banishes millions of bots? That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.